Andrew Yang, thanks for being with me.
My pleasure. Great to see you, Boaz.
Yeah. So this is not a podcast about politics.
Thank goodness for
Exactly.
everybody.
So I'm going to start with this question. Why politics? Like you.
I decided to head toward politics because I was trying to solve a problem. And I came to believe that there was no way you could realistically solve the problem without getting involved politically. But I can prove that I didn't have politics in mind as late as 2016 because I ran an entrepreneurship organization called Venture for America that operated in 12 or 13 cities, and none of them were in Iowa or New Hampshire. And if I had been smart and been thinking about politics, I totally would have launched in one of those two places.
But you went to Brown, right, for undergrad?
Yeah.
Was the idea of solving problems came with you to Brown, or just we hang out on the beautiful campus and said, I need to solve problems?
I was definitely a fairly typical college kid, so I wasn't thinking about big problems at the time. My biggest problem was getting a date, and I spent a lot of time doing martial arts and in the gym and playing video games, so I was that kind of guy.
Yeah.
In college, didn't really know what I wanted to do, so I went to law school here in the city at Columbia.
Yeah.
And then at that point, then it was like, okay, let me start my career as an attorney at one of these big firms, but I pretty quickly concluded that that wasn't what I wanted to do. I did not know I wanted to be, quote unquote, an entrepreneur or any of that stuff until I walked into a guy's office. His name was Mark Jacobstein, and he was running a startup called Small World. I was maybe 25 years old at the time, and I just thought to myself, I want to be that guy. I want to...
What about him was the thing that you're like, this is what I want?
Like I walked into, it was one of these cool Chelsea lofts. It had maybe 20 or 30 people in there. And he was the head of the company, and he was working on, what he was working on wasn't anything that spectacular. Sorry, Mark. I think it was, some kind of gaming thing. But just the fact that he was the captain of his own little ship really struck me, where my father was a physicist for IBM in the labs in Yorktown Heights. And he used to come home really angry, and I was 12 or 13. I said, oh, like, why are you so mad? And he said, when you don't know how to invent anything anymore at IBM, they make you a manager. So it's all these white managers bossing around all the Asian engineers who are actually in the lab doing things. And I heard that and I was like, that doesn't sound very cool. But one of the things...
then you chose to go to law school. So I just want to pause for a second.
Sure.
When I'm thinking attorney, I don't think entrepreneurship. Generally, I mean, there's some attorneys that are entrepreneurs, right? So it sounds like there's like a tag of war between the message you got from your dad, but then going to Brown, then going to Columbia for law school. Where's that internal war that happened?
Oh, I agree with you. I had a notion. So when I was a kid, I thought this was my vision for myself at the time. And I was the son of immigrants too, so you don't necessarily see everything that's out there. But I thought, what I'm going to do? I'm going to get a good career going, and then I'm going to invest in local small businesses, and eventually some of them will become bigger, and then I'll have like this interesting portfolio is what I imagined. And then when I actually arrived at Davis Polk, I was like, okay, I don't think I want to be here that long because I'm getting better at things I don't want to get better at, and I don't look around and think I want that person's life, or career.
There was nothing inspiring about what you saw.
Yeah, which by the way is like a pretty good heuristic if you're young, is like look around the office or room and say like, hey, is there anyone here I want to be? And if the answer is no, then you might not be in the right place. And if the answer is yes, then congrats. Yeah. So in my case, when I met Mark, I was like, oh, that's much closer to what I want to be. I want to be someone who is succeeding or failing based upon decisions I'm making. And there was some sense I had even then that I didn't want my career to be contingent on whether some person liked me after I'd been working my way up some corporate ladder, and then 8 years in, someone's like, yeah, I don't like you so much like the other person.
I got to pause for a second. This is mind-blowing to me. You said that you, if I understand correctly, being liked by someone is not a major, cause to do something, right? And then you chose politics, which is all about do people like you and vote for you. That's incredible. So how do you make that connection?
Yeah, I'm someone who's, again, set out to solve problems. And for me, and that wasn't my ambition when I was younger. When I was younger, I had a fairly normal ambition set, I think. In my case, it actually shifted when I was 34 years old and my little company was bought by a big company. And so I made some money. And at that point, I was like, I'm on top of the world. I'm like indestructible. I'm 34 years old. I'm a self-made millionaire. I was unmarried at the time. So like, imagine
The
that
good
guy.
life, exactly.
So it's like, okay,
you made it. Yeah.
what the heck should I take a big swing at, given that now in my own mind, I can do no wrong, or even if it doesn't work, like I'll be fine. So I started an organization called Venture for America that trained enterprising young people in startups in Detroit, Cleveland, Baltimore, Birmingham, New Orleans, a bunch of these cities.
Well, how do you train them?
What we did, you'll appreciate this, I think, we placed them at startups in those cities with a thesis. So are you familiar with Teach for America?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So I saw what Teach for America had done for these young people in these communities, and I thought there needs to be an entrepreneurship version of that. That's what Venture for America, hopefully it even sounds kind of reminiscent. And so I thought instead of 2 years in a troubled school or a classroom, 2 years in a startup working for a more experienced entrepreneur. And at the end of 2 years, if you want to start your own company, we have a little fund and an accelerator to help speed you on your way.
Microloans or low interest.
Equity investment. And so there have been some very successful companies that came out of Venture for America, like Bonza Pastas, one of the ones you might have seen in your grocery store. But I started that organization in 2011. I put in 6 figures of my own at that time because, again, I was like, I'm on top of the world. I can do anything. Why do I want to start this org? Sure, here's some money. And I went without salary for a while. And this is a long-winded way of winding up to how I ended up in the presidential race in 2020. So I ran Venture for America from 2011 to 2017, traveling the Midwest and the South. And the purpose of Venture for America was to revitalize American cities and communities through entrepreneurship. It's a very lofty ambition. And I came to realize that you had massive economic changes and transformations going that were going to head the other direction, particularly in former manufacturing hubs like Detroit and Cleveland and the rest of it.
Yeah.
And then when Donald Trump won in 2016, I was surprised. I thought Hillary was going to win. And then I was like, okay, stop the press. Like, what happened here? And when I dug into it, I concluded that the reason why Trump won was that we'd automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs that had previously been in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, and Michigan, all states that Trump needed to win and did win. And if you dig into the voter district data, you see that there's a straight line up to the right between the closing of a manufacturing plant and the movement to Trump in that district. If I close the plant.
So let's look at it because I really want to look from a leadership perspective, right? So this conversation is about you're a top performer. You're someone who accomplished things way outside of the ordinary. And that's the conversation we're having. I'm looking at what you're saying. You said there was something you saw with the potential with those young people, right? They're lost, there's no guidance, whatever the version that you saw there.
Yeah.
And it seems from what you're saying that someone else tapped into that conversation. What is the psychological process someone is going through when they're losing their jobs, they don't have the training, and then what attracts them so much into a leader or a person like Donald Trump?
Well, so I, for many, many years, had embedded in my mind what it was like to be a failed entrepreneur because my first startup did not work when I was in my mid-20s. And I went through some challenging times, personally and professionally. And then I became the head of this education company that then did quite well. So I remember the years of struggle. And I think that if you're a young man in particular in this country and you don't have a path, then you look around and say, okay, like, why do I feel so negatively about my future, my prospects, my dating life, or whatever it is, and you just look around for an explanation. And I thought that Donald Trump provided a very, very misleading explanation around, hey, we're going to reopen the mines. The reason you're upset is because of these outsiders who are coming in or immigrants or whatever it happened to be. And that was, to me, like an appealing message, even if it tended to, be inaccurate in some respects.
Well, it worked, right? However we feel about it, it worked because people voted for him.
Yeah, and there were some people that were interviewed in those communities, and I hung out a lot in the Midwest and the South, and someone would say, you do know he's full of shit, right? And they'd be like, "Oh yeah, I know he's lying, and he's not going to reopen the mines and whatnot. Like he's not going to bring back the manufacturing jobs." And it's like, "So why are you voting for him?" It's like, "Well, at least he's talking to me. At least he's here."
So it wasn't about. So he wasn't. Again, it's funny how we get to Trump, even though
Even though
but
we're not
that,
talking
we said no politics,
necessarily,
then we got to all the roads leads to Trump. But from a leadership perspective, it wasn't about from what you're saying. It wasn't about people being inspired. What a great manager he is, or successful, which is a big part of the American dream, right? We both, you're a son of immigrants. I'm an immigrant myself. It wasn't about like, oh, anyone can make it in America. It was more about he's speaking to me, and he is successful. Therefore, I should listen to him. What exactly was the thing that you think he tapped into from a leadership perspective?
He had a very clear message. Again, I thought it was misleading, but he was hitting it hard. And he is an avatar of a certain form of American success because he's a famous billionaire who's been on people's TV screens for decades. And so you think, okay, this guy is super familiar. He's made it. I mean, he's had a whole slew of businesses that are around how to be like him, whether it's, Trump University or I guess maybe if you eat a Trump steak, you're a little bit more Trumpy or something like that.
Ties, yeah.
So he had this brand around it, and it worked on a lot of run-of-the-mill working class Americans. But I think he also tapped into this sense of loss among a lot of working class communities, that things weren't going so well for them. And objectively, that's correct. Like things have not been going well for them. And I think the Democratic Party sort of missed that.
Yeah. Going back to your organization, what did you promise the owners of those startups? I understand the size of the young people. Like you gave them a tutor, an inspiration, a path outside of their regular path. What was the promise on the other side?
It was a slam dunk because I'd lived a version of this. I'd run a growth company myself. So when you're running a startup, you don't have time to go on campus and try and make your case to various young people. Be like, hey, come work for my startup. Now, what we did is we made that case for you, and then we would bring you a talented young person that in the absence of Venture for America might have gone to McKinsey or Morgan Stanley or Booz Allen or whatever the heck it is. Because here's my thesis, that in America today, smart kids who went to places like Brown or Columbia, where I went to school, do one of 6 things in 6 places. It's finance, consulting, law, tech, medicine, or academia in New York, Boston, Chicago, DC, LA, or San Francisco.
Yep.
And by the way, this isn't just me, making a hypothetical argument. I mean, if you actually dig into the numbers, 70 to 80% of graduates
going that direction. I have a daughter in
go.
college in Tufts. This is exactly the direction all of her friends are going to.
Yes.
Yep.
And so when I went to the CEO of the startup, I said, hey, we're going to recruit these kids for you. We're going to send them your way. You can interview them, vet them, do whatever you want. And then if you decide to make an offer and they join you, they will work for you at your startup in Detroit or New Orleans and I think the rate to start was something like $40,000. Which
fraction of the cost of what it will cost to bring a kid.
And of course, then for the young person, they're living in low-cost cities, so like you can live on $40,000 in Detroit or New Orleans.
Yep.
It's like the rent's very low. And so for the startup CEO, they're like, wait a minute, like you're just a talent pipeline for me, and I'm going to have this whippersnapper. And some of these kids were killers. You had like the computer science major from Princeton showing up at the startup in Baltimore being like, hey, I'm ready to work on your
Why
product.
did he or she come to Baltimore? Because they grew up there?
No, it was because our pitch to them was, look, if you want to become a startup CEO yourself, you're going to get a better experience at that startup in Baltimore than you are at Google. Because like Google may or may not teach you jack shit about becoming an entrepreneur.
They won't.
No, it won't.
They won't.
It's going to teach you how to get really good food at the cafeteria. No offense, whatever. I mean, they teach you other things.
The food is excellent in the cafeteria of Google. But yeah, and the chance of you running a startup in New York will cost you 4 or 5 times more, right? Because you have to pay salaries, you have to pay rent, all that stuff. So start a startup in Baltimore and go from there. Is that the idea?
Yeah, and so I spent 6 years running Venture for America and heading to all of these cities. So I was like the Johnny Appleseed of young entrepreneurs, and it's incredibly rewarding.
Did you was it a non-for-profit or was it
It was a not-for-profit. We started it with, $120,000 from me, and then I raised another $250,000 or so, and then it mushroomed to a budget of $5 or $6 million by the time I stepped down. It was pretty funny, Boaz. I was like, hey, I went to my board and was like, I'm stepping down to run for president. And then some of them were like, of? And I was like, United States,
how
obviously.
drunk were you?
And then,
Exactly. President of what? What organization?
Yeah. And so I was like, yeah, it's fine. And I'm going to go make the case to the American people that we're undergoing these transformative economic times, and we need to think bigger about what to do when AI comes online. I got to say, my case has aged pretty well.
Yeah, very, very well. It's amazing. There's a statement that after the prophets disappear, the future was given to the children and to the crazy. So you saw the future somehow. You're one of the prophets that you can actually see what's happening.
Yeah, I went out to Silicon Valley back in 2017 after Trump won and was like, hey guys, who's going to go tell the country about AI and the rest of it? And I will say that everyone at that table was like, not me. And I was like, all right, I get it, guys. Yeah. Like, I'll do it, but you have to max out to my campaign. And then everyone was like, what is the max? And I was like, 2,900. And then there's like, oh, it's not so bad.
Of course, absolutely. But you think it's not, maybe you don't, I don't know. It sounds like it's not a big deal, but I want to pause on what you've done and really dive in, because as people listen, it's crazy. You were running an organization and you walk up one day or over a few months or whatever, I would love to hear more about it, and you decide you want to go to run for president. Not even like, let me go local and then keep on growing from there. Share with us a little bit about the psychological, emotional process you went through. I mean, it is insane, because I can tell you every time when I decided to take my company public, I was so scared. And I was like, I don't know this world. What the hell am I doing? Who am I to do that? I mean, all those...
Sure.
Yeah. How did you do it?
Very reasonable sounding concerns. Now, so part of it, and some of the people listening to this, I think you're actually in this category too. Part of it was that I'd met 2 of the last 3 presidents, a dozen senators, half a dozen governors, dozens of members of Congress. And you know what I never found myself thinking? Wow, this person is much better and sharper and stronger than me or anyone I know. You know what I mean? I mean,
this is great observation, because then you realize that you realize they're humans, right? There's good and bad. So what is it? Is it the position that makes them so great, or it doesn't matter? They're just
my argument is that most of them felt more stuck than great. And one of the things that I say to members of YPO when I had YPO meetings, I was like, look, guys, I don't know you that well, but I would put you all in charge of our government 10 times out of 10 relative to the people who are currently our leaders, and they have a good
going back
laugh.
to Trump, isn't what he's trying to do with Elon Musk now?
Elon's a singular figure,
entrepreneur
but I think I'm talking about your average operator of a medium-sized successful business, because that's what I was in a past life. And you can't be super ideological about the way you run the business. You can't yell at the numbers. You have to try and be good to your team and grow opportunities and do a good job by your stakeholders and everything else. And Trump is an anomaly, an outlier, where he became a successful business figure primarily through branding. I mean, he's not really like a talented operator.
Yeah,
a lot of his
dad
stuff
gave him $170 million.
Doesn't do so hot. Elon is his own class of human. So I was with a friend of mine who described Elon as like an outlier on top of an outlier. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I mean, like I think Elon himself gave SpaceX a 10% chance of working, and like Tesla a 10% chance of working. So he's already like a 1 in 100.
Yeah, exactly. And you keep on repeating the message. Eventually, it's going to maybe stick, right? So he believed 10%, but he kept on pursuing it as if it's 100%. Is that right?
Yeah, and by the way, Elon said something that has stuck with me ever since I heard it. He said, sometimes if the outcome is positive enough, you pursue it even if your probability of success is quite low. And
isn't that what you did?
Yes. So this goes back to Andrew Yang's decision to run for president.
Yeah, it's the same way of thinking.
Yeah. So I consider myself rational. So I thought, okay, what are the possible upsides of my running for president? And the upsides were that I could explain to my country the fourth industrial revolution and the advent of AI. I could mainstream solutions that I thought were inevitable and very positive that could alleviate poverty, gross poverty. I thought I could improve the human condition at the outside, because if the U.S. gets with the program, then other countries like in Europe would be like, oh my God, like the U.S. is actually doing stuff. Like we're much more enlightened than them. And then the downsides were things like time away from my family, opportunity costs, total public humiliation, which I thought was, a real possibility, obviously, because you could run for president and it goes
the
very
second
poorly.
largest fear is public humiliation. I mean, after death, that's everybody says that's the biggest thing. So most people who are not top performers will pause at that moment, whether they're saying it, whether they say it out loud or not. They'll be like, well, there's something about it, right? They're so scared of being public humiliated, or not even humiliated, like you use that word, but just scared of failing. And you're like, no, it's president of the United States or failing. I choose to run for president. So that's a very unique position. I hope you know that. That's extraordinary.
Well, thanks. I mean, part of it too is like I would look at things like the primary debates in the Republican Party circa 2016, the one Trump won, and I would think to myself, I could do better than that crew. Whether that was, I'm just gonna think like Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, Rand Paul, Ben Carson, like that crew. I was like, I can do better than that.
What can you do better? Can you do policies better, or can you connect with people better? Because we both know it's two different things, right? And politicians got to have both.
I thought I could make a clearer, more cogent, compelling case for myself and my campaign than a lot of the professional politicians that I saw out there. I thought I was smarter and had a clearer vision, genuinely. And so I thought, and as I was deliberating on whether to run for president, I will say I did not think the odds of my winning were very high ever.
But you saw an opportunity to raise the issue, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So I thought the possibility of my mainstreaming the fourth industrial revolution and meaningful solutions was still not over 50%, but that was like, I was like, look, if I work my ass off and do a great job, I can get that done. And that struck me as an act of service. I also thought I could raise money because I'd raised, like at least a few $1 million for Venture for America. And so I thought, well, this should be easier. It turns out it was not. It was harder. But so I thought, I can make a case. I can raise money. I can write a book, because I'd written a book in 2014 called Smart People Should Build Things about Venture for America.
Book, right?
So it's like, okay, I can do a lot of the things that I would need to do to try and start a political campaign. And if you think about the benefits and the costs were all me. It was like humiliation, opportunity cost, time away from my family. And then the benefits were the public. And so I thought, okay, if I commit a few years of my life, I think I can do something positive for the public. And one of the comps I made to entrepreneurs like you, Boaz, is that if I were to say to you, hey, you have to grind your ass off. Well, no, let me try it another way. If I were to say to you, you're going to start a business, how much time are you committing to starting that business?
As long as it needs.
So you don't know, right?
I have no idea exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Whereas running for president, I thought this is going to be 3 years of my life that I'm going to be killing myself and be traveling all the time, the rest of it. But I know it ends in 3 years.
Oh, that's so great, because we talk often about playing games, right? So one of the definition of a game, it has particular time limit. Because if you play basketball with no limitation, it's going to be boring after a while. It's exhausting, but also boring. When you have one of the reason games are successful, because you say there's 90 minutes for this, or there's 4 quarters, or whatever it is. So you said there's a game here.
Yes.
Well, being president.
Yep.
And there's a timeline for running for president. And and even being president, also 8 years, you can do. I mean, it might change now, but as you said lately. But you said here's the investment, right? As an exchange for, like, I can literally change the world, and the downside is insignificant compared to the upside.
Yeah. And so I knew I had 3 years of making this case, but knowing that it ends in 2020, probably in February, honestly, though, because that's when I thought it would probably end for me.
Yeah.
then it's very, very doable. Because if you're an entrepreneur, you're signing up for, in many cases, 5 to 10 years minimum. And if you're not willing to do it for 5 to 10 years, then you probably shouldn't start. You know? Whereas running for president, it's like, okay, succeed or fail. And this is one thing I did say, like as soon as a friend gave me 2,900, I said to myself and my team, I was like, we are in this until the voting. Like there is zero consideration of me dropping out.
Burn the bridges behind you.
Yes, even if it's just me walking around in Iowa with a sandwich board at the end of this thing, like I am in this until the voting happens.
What was the reaction of the environment? Because that's another thing that impacts leaders substantially. Do people say, go for it? I mean, from your wife all the way to your family, to your friends, everybody says, or some people say, well, Andrew, you're a little crazy. And how did it impact you? So even though whatever they said, how did it impact you?
It was surprisingly not positive. and I do relate some stories about the early days of the campaign in my last nonfiction book, Forward, Notes on the Future of Our Democracy. I try to make it fun and accessible for people who
it's a great book.
Who would want to imagine what it's like to run for president. But one of the stories I shared, Boaz, which people can relate to, it was so painful, where I'd show up to a school event and then another parent would be like, oh, what do you do?
What are you up to?
What are you up to? And then I would eventually at some point say like, oh, I'm running for president right now. And people would literally be like, are you kidding? I'd be like, no, I'm currently a presidential candidate. And then I would have to talk to them for 10 minutes about like my campaign and the rationale. And then you know what they'd say at the end of it? Good luck with that. like there was never like, how can I help? How can I support you? How can I get involved? It was always like, oh, that's really interesting. And so eventually I just did not want to talk about it in that setting at all. I would just say I'm an author or like I'm like, you know, like doing this or that.
But at the same time, and tell me if you were surprised, you got a huge following during the campaign. I mean, you kind of conquered the college, the 20-something. You became the hipsters, college kids guru for a period of time. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, eventually everyone in that parent set, you know, I'm describing would see me on national TV during the debates and be like, oh, like they
want to take a selfie with you.
Yeah, and then it was like, oh, can you come speak to the school? It's like I'm busy in New Hampshire and Iowa. I'm like not talking it like know the Manhattan.
Yeah. So what
school.
did the young what did the young people heard? What did they hear that the parents at the school did not hear?
Well, I do want to outline this process a little bit. So I leave Venture for America mid-2017, and then I declare in early 2018, and no one cares at all. And so there was about a year of my marching around in relative obscurity, having awkward conversations and the rest of it. And some of my friends were like, I'm into it, Andrew. I think you're crazy, but you're a good friend, and here's money, and I'll host an event. And then other people were like, you know, I want nothing to do with this. And then it was... in early 2019 that things flipped. So it was 12 months of relative anonymity. And then I was on Joe Rogan in early 2019. And then the Democratic primary debates start happening in June. And after I'm on the debate stage, then I get recognized on the street. And my wife starts joking, we can't take you anywhere. So there was this massive awareness wave.
So is it a tipping point or is it momentum? Because it sounds like you just, you know, we speak about momentum where it's 1,000 units of effort with 1 unit of success. And with time, you become 1,000 units of success with 1 unit of effort. That's momentum, right? But you speak about Joe Rogan as like a tipping point for you. Which one was it? A combination of both? Did you feel when it's coming? Or did you just realize that you walk on the street and someone wants to, you walk in with your 2 kids and people keep on stopping you for selfies?
So at least right now, the way I recall the campaign, tipping point number 1 was being on the Sam Harris podcast in 2018. Tipping point number 2 was being on the Joe Rogan podcast in 2019. And the tipping point number 3 were the Democratic primary debates in summer 2019. And with each of those, the energy around me just kept going up and up, whereby midsummer 2019, we're having rallies of thousands of people. I get recognized on the street. My social media following shoots up.
Was it strategic or was it because I'm thinking? I mean, we have you, which is such a great guest, right? But I'm thinking about the person who's listening to it, and they're not Andrew Yang. They're not maybe running. They're running business, or they're starting a business. So was it strategic? Were you sitting with your team and said, "Let's get on one of our people like Sam Harris? Like he's not as big as Joe Rogan, but he's definitely known. He's an intellectual. He's smart. All that stuff." Was it more like, "Let me kiss any frog I can find, and eventually something is going to happen"?
It was being opportunistic, where anytime someone said they were willing to do something or have me on, I was like, all right, let's go. Because what else am I doing?
I feel honored that you came here.
Go. Well, now I'm happy to say, Boaz, I have many choices, and
yes, and
I turn down most things. Yes, et cetera.
Yeah.
Because anyway. But at that time, it's like I'm a builder and a grinder. So if someone wants to have me on and they have a small audience, it's cool. And then maybe it doesn't generate a whole lot of money or support, but it's fine. Like, we'll come back and just keep going. And what happened was, I did some interview and I was talking about AI, and then Sam Harris saw that and then reached out to my team saying, "Hey, I'd like to have Andrew on the podcast." And then it was like, wait a minute. So what happened was, all of the little things ended up creating an opportunity that then leveled us up. And then I will say, the reason why I got on Joe Rogan, genuinely, I don't know how many people know this, is that Sam Harris actually called Joe Rogan and said, "Hey, I think you should have Andrew on." And so Joe was like, "Okay." And so
that's amazing.
And after Rogan, and the energy around us definitely had like another level change. And then the Democratic primary debates brought a whole nother set of opportunities. So after that, I was on Jimmy Kimmel, Colbert, Ellen, Seth Meyers. Yeah. So it became
major league.
Yeah. So then I became like a
household name,
like a mainstream figure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which was also like a bizarre experience. It's like, because that was not my intention, but it's like, you're trying to improve the human condition, so you'll take any platform.
Yeah, of course. And so do you think, going back to those parents, do you think that the young people just heard you in different platform that spoke to them, or that there's something you said that kind of like hit them, that you got what they're concerned with? Which one was it? The parents versus those college
I think people? It was that I was communicating in a language that they understood and believed on platforms that they actually used. So I was heavily on social media, and I would do snippets. So one of the things that people complain about all the time about our political figures, is like authenticity. And so in my case, it became just part of my daily routine, where my team would say, "Okay, we're in this diner in New Hampshire. Say a few words about climate change. Say a few words about firearm regulation, or say a few words about this and that." And I would just build it in, and young people would then see, it's like, oh, I actually feel like this guy's not talking in political language. He's talking
he's a regular guy.
Yeah. Like I was joking, my normalcy was a competitive advantage.
Well, you understood what they're looking for, like that kind of connection. That is, because you're not average. This is reality. You went to, you're a thinker, you went to Brown, you went to Columbia. You have all those evidence from the past that you're not average, but you find a way to connect to people and speak to them on, quote unquote, their level. Is that what you're saying?
What's interesting, Bo, is I've been reflecting on this a fair amount, but I think partially because I'm the child of immigrants, partially because I'm Asian American, partially because of my failures in my 20s. I felt myself to be still an outsider. Certainly, I mean, in something like the Democratic nomination process,
I was an
outsider, right?
Create a third party. I mean, how can you be more outsider than that? You will refuse to kiss the ring. I mean, you're an outsider by definition, aren't you?
And so I think some young people saw it and were just like, oh, like this guy is like, a fairly normal, relatable person who's trying to do things. And some of the things I was arguing for, they like the sound of, I still am very much of the opinion that we should be putting economic resources into people's hands in different ways, because right now AI is just going to soak up more and more of it.
Yes.
A lot of people are going to be looking around. It's fun reflecting on some of these experiences because I get asked about various decisions I've made, and I think that everything is kind of built on whatever happened before. And at every stage, I've thought, well, if this doesn't work, I'll be fine.
Were you fine? I mean, was there a moment when you said, "Oh, I actually might be the president of the United States," or at least when the nominee?
Well, I think
You'll be the nominee. Yeah.
I think that I grew a lot during the time where I was a little naive going in. So I joke with friends, but it's true. It's like I've made the same mistake half a dozen times, which is I think the next thing is going to be something like the last thing. So it's like, okay, I started a nonprofit. Running for president's going to be sort of like that, and it was not. And then running for mayor was also
Like
just a
president, but it's
totally
not,
different thing,
yeah.
very different.
Yeah.
And you end up getting stretched in directions that you never would have foreseen. I mean, I had no idea what it was like to have thousands of people at a rally that are investing their hopes for the future, and you didn't know what that was like until you do it. And then you're like, okay, I guess I'd better work my ass off and try and deliver because all these people now
Counting on you.
yeah, not counting on me. I'd never had people break down in tears when your campaign ends. But so there are all of these very, very unforeseeable, unprecedented experiences that I had.
Yeah. How do you feel about when people cried when you closed the campaign? I mean, those are the moments when you realize what an impact you're making on people, right?
Yeah. I mean, again, it was really devastating. And for me personally, you feel like you could have done more, even though now I look back and be like, it's like, or you let people down. There's that sense you have. And none of this was foreseeable to me back in 2017 when I decided to go down this journey. I just thought to myself, hey, can I help inform my country about what's coming down the pike, and maybe we can do something meaningful about it. And the tough part, Boaz, is that I actually had succeeded in some ways. That people actually did hear about AI and national platforms, and the approval rating for something like universal basic income more than doubled and things like that. But I still came off the trail thinking like I hadn't solved the problem.
But let's just you wake up in the morning and you realize it's done, and there's a whole staff that is responsible. I can tell you from when I lost my company, I didn't sleep for months, and it was more about my concern about my employees, my investors. More about I was like, I'll be fine. I was really impacted by the impact of my company collapsing. That was the moment. That's what kept me up at night more than anything else. How was it for you when you realized that it's done? The music ended.
It was really, really difficult and wrenching. But then in my experience, it was complicated by the fact that then COVID happened. Because
Blame
my campaign...
the COVID.
My campaign ends February 2020.
Wow. In March, everything gets shut down.
Yes.
Yes.
And so then all of a sudden, I'm Zooming every day for 8 hours a day and the rest of it. And there are some people that are part of my team that I still feel responsible for. But some of them then end up joining a new organization that I start. And then, we were working in different ways during that time to help Joe Biden at the time, who was the Democratic nominee in 2020.
Yeah.
And so I think COVID ended up changing the transition in a particular way. But I am 100% with you in terms of your number one concern being your people.
Yeah.
Where you look around and say, I have to make sure that they're going to be okay. And then my people, you could define it in different ways. Number one is the folks who'd actually worked with me on the campaign. And some of them I'm still working with to this day, 5 years later. And, where we have wonderful relationships. Some of them left 4 years ago, and I haven't, I hear they're doing well, that sort of thing. But then in my case, you have then a level below that, or where, for example, friends of mine who hosted events or supported the campaign. And then you had people that showed up to rallies and are on social media. And so I felt responsible for all these people to be like, look, here's my vision for the future and how we can get there. But one of the interesting things that I've experienced, Boaz, and and this isn't me, this is just me reflecting, is that a lot of those people have long since moved on because they were my super fans in 2020, but I haven't been a presidential candidate for quite some time. And I mean, I'll run into young people, to your point, and some of them were like, so great to meet you. Like I was such like a fan of yours 4 years ago. Like, what are you up to now?
Yes.
And so one person compared me to like a rock band that had like this hit album.
Hit album, yeah.
And then they run into you later. They're like, hey, like,
Yeah.
what are you up to?
You're playing weddings now.
yeah. And then I'm just like, you mean you didn't see the TED Talk? Like, you're not like keeping up on my blog or whatever? But like, I mean, most people don't because most people have lives.
Yes. Yeah.
So
but you chose the path less, what's the expression? You chose to be an outsider. Look, at least it sounds to me that you never chose the easy way. You chose to start a non-for-profit in a market that needed something. It could have been easier for you to stay in New York and do things here, right? You chose to run for president without any inside take on how parties work, right? Then you chose to be a mayor of New York, which is probably the second most difficult job in America. You never choose comfortable paths. So there's a cost to it, isn't it? Or am I just not seeing it right?
No, I think you are. And one of the things I felt I owed people after the presidential campaign ended was a path forward. Like, what are we going to do? And I sat down and tried to determine, it's like, okay, why do I feel so terrible about American politics? And I concluded that I felt terrible about American politics largely because of our current two-party system that is really, really distorting a lot of things, and it doesn't represent a lot of people's points of view, really. And so then I concluded, it's like, okay, you need to have a new independent political movement, and thank you for believing in and supporting the movement.
Yeah,
it's not left or right, it's forward.
Yeah.
And to your point, it's like, hey, is that easy or hard? It's very, very hard, but it also is what I believe, and I felt like I owed it to people to actually lay out the case that I genuinely believed in. And there had been this period of months prior that I was actually like rewarded for saying what I believed in.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you don't want to do is try and calibrate what you're doing to what you think the market's going to want at any moment in time.
So do you have your own arrow that kind of like points the right direction? You like, no matter what happens around you, you keep on, I'm going to stick on that arrow?
Yeah.
That's rare. Just from business, from any element, if you work, I mean, politics, obviously, but it's not very common because you do look at data and see what people like, what people don't like, how can I speak to them? So how do you play those juggling between those two worlds?
Yeah, this has been a tension for me, Boaz. It's interesting because I very rarely get to talk about this sort of thing.
Well, that's why you're here, right?
So,
I told you it's not going to be about politics. I want to.
So there have been a number of times when I was presented an opportunity where I was like, yeah, that's not really like what I want to do. It's not a fit. And there was money involved. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And then there are things that I would do would be like, hey, this is what I think we should do. And then like it doesn't work so well because, like people's attention is moved on, or people, enjoy tribalism or whatever it happens to be. And the tension I have is like, okay, I think something's right. Do I listen to what the market is saying if the market isn't into this at this moment? Or do I say, screw it, I don't care what the market says, like, this is what I think. I guess with the rock band analogy, it would be like I'm playing music
that you love.
Like, I'm playing music
exactly.
that I like.
I'm enjoying the playing music, whether people are going to buy the records or not. But you and I both are not in our 20s, and we know that you don't live in a bubble. You live in reality with money and powers and influence, especially someone like you is so committed to making a difference in the world, right? You can be completely disconnected from the market and say, here's what I believe in, and that's it. That's the end of the story,
Yeah, especially if you still have mouths to feed, whether they're your staff or your family.
Yeah, exactly. Staff first, then family. Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's been a fascinating tension for me this past period of time. I mean, I think I've navigated it okay in that I'm still married and still able to provide for my family, and
All the
like I
credit
still
to your
have
wife. You know,
people,
forget about you. You know, it's the credit to her.
It still have people that want to work with me.
Yes. Yeah.
And all the rest of it. And part of it has been, I tried to convey this to my kids. My kids are younger than yours. But I tried to graph for them daddy's income. You know, and then I'm like, hey, I was a lawyer for all of 5 months, and so my income was here. And then I became a wannabe entrepreneur, and then my income was lower down here, and then it was like
exit,
lower,
and then
lower.
jumps like, you know,
And then you have like the
exactly,
exit year, and it's like here, and then all of a sudden, then it's like this. You know, and so it's very spiky. It waxes and wanes, and so you can't be deterred by a couple of lean years. But to your point, it's like, you know, what if the lean years extend into like a lean decade, and then you're like, all right, maybe you're not doing something so good.
But also, I think that I remember I worked with someone, and she turned to my team, and she said, "You got to get that working for Boaz is not going to be comfortable. If you want comfort, don't work for him. Don't work in this company. It might be fascinating, challenging, you're going to grow, but comfortable, it's not going to be." So it seems like if someone's sticking with Andrew Yang, it's not going to be a comfortable life. It might be extraordinary, it might make a big difference, because you never choose the easy path, it seems to me. Am I reading right?
I think there's much truth in what you say, and that a lot of people that work with me are made of very stern stuff and have very deep values and beliefs. Like they're doing, I mean, there are better and easier ways to make money than like whatever the heck I'm doing it at any moment in time. But the people around me are extraordinary, and I'm super grateful for them, which is one reason why if they want to work with me, I'll make sure and find a way to pay them.
Yeah. And where do you go with your challenges? So I understand people come to you because but when you're stuck, when you're frustrated, when you are, who are the people you pick up the phone, you call?
No, the people I call are friends of mine that I grew up with that are just normal dudes because my life is stressful, but my stressors are highly unusual. And then if I talk to a friend who is trying to figure out how to pay for his child's college, or a friend who's struggling with something that most Americans struggle with, whatever, then it kind of puts me in my place and reminds me, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Like all my concerns are bullshit compared to the concerns of most people. I'm very, very fortunate, and these are good people that I am proud to call friends. And they've worked hard and like blah, blah, blah. And like, to them, my path is like just absolute insanity and like, not relatable. But it just reminds me, it's like, oh yeah, I'm really, really lucky. Like my life has ups and downs, but it's great. It's like I'm, and one of the things too, that someone, related to me, it's like, there are still some people who look to me for uplift and positivity and a sense of possibility.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so if your lot in life is to be the provider of those sorts of things, it's like pretty great.
Yeah, it's a privilege, right?
Yeah, it's a privilege. And
is there anyone in politics that you met that you looked and you said, maybe when you were younger or now, and said, this is how things should be run, not from a political perspective, not from their point of view, but from a leadership perspective?
There are some high character people that I met along the way, and public servants who got into it for the right reasons, and like. Is
that an old disappearing generation, or do you see young people who are doing the same? Are you optimistic still about the future of leaders in the United States in politics?
I would struggle to call myself optimistic because I think it's harder and harder for people. I think it's harder and harder for people to get into that for the right reasons and do the right thing and lead a good life without getting dragged in various directions. It's one reason why I feel very fortunate, because I haven't relied upon politics to feed my family. And a lot of people who've gotten into it for the right reasons, like actually kind of need it for that. And then, it's like, it's one reason why, I wanted to take advantage of my relative freedom because, so if I don't need it for my rent. But I think it's getting harder and harder, because I think if a normal person gets into politics now, like, like they're going to have a hard time sending their kids to college, honestly,
Yeah.
unless they do something kind of weird.
Yeah, exactly. Illegal, you mean? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, tuition's crazy now. Anyway, so I want to make it easier for people to do the right thing. And right now, I think there are a lot of forces that make you tempted to do the wrong thing.
So you meet young people. What's the advice you give them? Do you just go follow your passion, or do not go into politics if you really want to take care of your family, or you just like because you constantly interact with young people?
Yeah, I mean, I tell them to try and work with someone that they can learn from and would want their life to resemble.
Yeah, go back to the
Yeah,
start,
the
the original idea of you, like walk into a room and be inspired by the person that you're looking at.
Yeah, and then you'll just have something rub off on you naturally. One of the stories I tell is that we're all a combination of the 5 bosses that we first worked for, and so you kind of have these voices in your head, and so you want the voice in your head to be something good.
Yeah. Any bosses that you like hoped you erased from your mind? You're like, this is the way not to do things that you had in the past,
Sure.
without mentioning the names.
No,
but,
I mean, but you still learn from those things.
Yes.
So like cautionary. I mean, most of my bosses have been, in the bounds of normalcy, and sometimes maybe like I wasn't the greatest report because, I mean, I tried. I've always. My wife says like, you've always tried to be a good team player.
yeah, but you didn't care enough. It seemed like your passion was somewhere else. So it's difficult to be excellent in something you don't really care about.
Yeah, I sometimes joke with people that I'm unemployable because now I have to do especially now because I'm 50 and like an institution, so I can't exactly. I mean, it actually sometimes entertains me to imagine my showing up and applying for a job.
Exactly. And they're like, how many weeks
Like,
vacation? What is it, the terms? What's the health insurance? Like,
yeah, I mean, I can't
we're
imagine any of
unemployable.
that stuff.
Entrepreneurs in their 50s are unemployable. Yeah.
Yeah, and we just have to build great things and have a positive impact. I try and remind myself how excited 20-something-year-old me would be with my life now,
Cool.
and that helps too.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, last question. What's next for you?
Oh my gosh, so many things.
And exactly, do tell us.
Yeah, so I am starting a company, so keep an eye out for that.
Yeah.
I'm trying to help good people get elected all the time. So if you go to forwardparty.com, you can see some of the folks. We're up to 46 elected officials,
Oh,
and there's
wow.
some really
Amazing.
Good people on the way.
So when you say helping people, is it financially? Is it you train them, you coach them? What's the help you actually giving the right people to do it?
It's money, it's exposure, it's staff. Like Forward Party has a full-time team that we get on, and we do give coaching to first-time candidates as well. So it's good fun on all levels. And the great thing about Forward is that we can support good independents. We can support good Dems or Republicans. Like, we just don't care.
Yeah, you're agnostic about that.
Yeah, we're agnostic about that,
you just
which
want
I think
good
is
people in the middle.
Yeah, is what most Americans would probably actually prefer.
Yeah, crazy. Yeah.
I just signed a new book deal, so I've got a book coming
congratulations.
out next year. That's tentatively called "Hey Yang, Where's My $1,000?" It's about some of the experiences. So
Exactly.
So it's fun to talk about some of these experiences because I'm actually going to try and delve in and unpack them for myself in some respects. I'll always have multiple projects. I'm on the board of a ranked choice voting organization called Fair Vote. There are 3 legs to the tripod. There's business, philanthropy, and politics. And I'm always engaged in all 3 nowadays.
Yeah. Oh, Andrew, first of all, thank you for being here. What a privilege. And I know you for a few years. You've always been an inspiration. So hopefully you're going to keep on inspiring people the way you've done. So really, thank you very much for being here.
Man, least I could do. Thank you for being a good friend and a staunch supporter. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. All right. Thank you. All right, Playbook. So we spoke about playing a game. And game is critical because life is a series of games. Anything you do, you can look at it and think, it's actually a game I'm playing. I'll give you a simple example. Being married is a game. It rules and regulation. and you have to live inside whatever the rules you created with your partner when you got married. Being single is also a game. So it's not that being married is better than being single, or being single is being married better than being married, but they're both games. Now, games have scores, has rules, has regulation, has time, and you might be a lifetime of an experience. So consider that everything you do, whether going to work or sitting on the couch doing nothing, it's a game. And if it's a game, it has to have scores, has to have time limits, and you have to make sure you actually chose to play it. Some people fall into a pattern of playing a game without even knowing they are actually playing a game. So when you take on something, think about, for how long will I do it? What is the goal? What's the score? How can I measure if I'm winning or losing? And if you cannot do those things, you're just floating around and you're not doing anything. And that will resolve with a lack of drive, a lack of understanding of what's happening, and you will be just being the impact of others versus actually doing what you want to do.